project, the eastern section from 83 to the Eastern Corporation line. Trans Systems is working very diligently to do all the appraisals and get all this stuff prepared for residents. They've engaged already over 20 residents directly, and they are working, very expeditiously to get all the other engagements out to residents on that. As far as update, we'll have another update in January as we get, some more feedback from them. Right now, as far as impacting construction schedule, there is no potential impacts. The biggest thing that we'll have to keep our eyes on, and we'll be working with them on that through the beginning of the new year, is in the event that a resident is unwilling to negotiate, which would require additional action on behalf of the city to secure the necessary property to do that project.
Thank you. Any questions on Public Works Director's report? Could you reiterate, please, about the branch pickup?
Yes. Crews are back out in force. We've got 2 trucks and actually running the streets, and we've completed a complete sweep through the whole city since we started last week. That finished today. So we'll send, we've got some other work to do, but then we'll send out another round of trucks next week just to get back on target with that.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? All right, then we'll move along to standing committees. First one would be Ms. Gentry with Building and Utilities.
Yeah, we have a couple items on the agenda tonight. One is the approval of, or acceptance of into the STAR program via NOPEC. We'll go into details on that. Also, the gas opt-in programs for NOPEC as well. And that was all.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Gentry? All right, we'll move along to Mr. Shamir with Communications, Environmental, and Rec Program.
Yes, we have an item, the reappointment of Mr. Dave Uptergraff and Mr. Weldon Rice to the Communication and Technology Commission for another 3-year term. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for him? Okay, we'll move along then to Mr. Arnold with Economic Development.
Thank you. No report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Arnold? We'll move along to Mr. Zuber with Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. The next finance meeting will be on January 6th, 6 p.m. in this room. I do have an update on our final income tax collections for the year. We collected $18,115,467 in income tax. That's $1 million more than the last 2 previous years in rough numbers.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Zuber? Okay. We'll move along now to Human Resources. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. Earlier in the collective committee meeting, we discussed the Human Resources agenda items tonight on this meeting. If there's any questions, there's several of them. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to go back to Mr. Widman with Finance, Interim Finance Director. Do you have any comments, sir, that need to be added to this meeting?
I don't have any comments unless there's questions that haven't been asked or answered.
Are there any questions for Mr. Widman at this point? Okay, thank you. Then we'll go right into the rest of our meeting. Thank you, sir. We're going to go to Public Safety and Health with Mr. Cause.
Thank you, Madam President. I have 2 items on the agenda for tonight. I'm going to be asking for suspension of the rule and passing on. I'm actually passing on with the emergency clause, not the suspension. I will discuss those when we get to them. And our next Public Safety and Health Committee meeting will be the 2nd Tuesday of January. It is January the 9th. And just a reminder that the new set date is the 3rd Tuesday, but for January, for attendance sake, we had to move it to the 2nd Tuesday in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Cause? Thank you, Mr. Cause. The next one is Public Service, which I chair. We have 2 items on our agenda this evening, and there will be no January meeting. Instead, we're going to have our next meeting February the 5th at 5:30 p.m. And you ask, why no January meeting? I don't think anybody wants to come. January 2nd, correct? Okay. The Tree Commission, never mind, go ahead, keep going. Public Service, that is it. We're now going to go to Planning Commission. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. There's no report this evening. We
Thank
will meet on, what is that going to be, January 7th? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, we'll move along now to Mr. Mayor, the Zoning Board.
Thank you. There's a meeting on December 11th. There were 2 area variances that were heard, and both were granted 4-0. The next meeting will be January 22nd at 7 p.m. in the council chambers.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Mayor? Okay, we'll move along now to Mr. Shamir with Parks and Recreation Commission.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Any special committees? I'm going to report on the Tree Commission. The Tree Commission is going to meet January the 8th at 6 p.m. We are working on updates to the ordinances based on the state standards that Mr. Robeson and I learned about when we were going through the Tree Commission Academy. I'm happy to report that we have 3 members that are going to be in the 2025 Tree Academy, and they will be starting shortly. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Any other special committees? Seeing none, we're now going to move along to audience participation on any topic that is on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody that wants to come forward? Greetings.
Good evening, Gerald W. Phillips, 461 Windward Way. Ordinance number 24-171, the speed limit. You look at what Avon does, they actually go out, take data of the area, and they take actual clock speed limits for the area which they're going to change. That's part of the ODOT report. Also, they go and they actually fill out the detailed crash report that ODOT requires. And this crash report just doesn't come up with 34 crashes that the police chief says. It breaks down the crashes based on crash severity, day of the week, hour of the day, type of crash, month, light condition, weather condition, contour, road conditions, intersection, speed, cause of the accident, work zone related, alcohol related, drug related, marijuana related. So they go through to make sure what all the criteria of the crash to determine whether or not speed is the problem. And ODOT uses a process called the US Limits 2 method when they do their studies. And that specific method specifically states in this information, and I quote, "A comprehensive crash study should be undertaken to identify engineering and traffic control deficiencies and appropriate corrective actions. The speed limit should only be reduced as the last measure after all other treatments have been either tried or ruled out." Obviously, the City of Avon Lake doesn't follow any of these procedures. They just say, well, we think we need to reduce the speed limit on Lake Road and on 83, and they don't do that. And I don't know why you just don't do it, okay? That's the mythology. Or maybe it's because, according to ex-council president and the ex-mayor, well, that's not how we do things. Well, you know, you should start doing things right. I mean, there's a US Limits 2 speed study zone, okay? You should have one, but you don't. You know, according to ODOT, the shortest acceptable speed zone is a half a mile. This isn't a half a mile. Lake Road isn't a half a mile. And according to Village, Kirtland Hills versus McGrath, you need business to be a business zone. You need businesses on 50% on both sides. you don't meet that, you don't qualify that. Why don't you just do it right and do a study? I don't know why you don't do it.
Thank you, sir, for sharing. Anybody else on something that's on tonight's agenda?
Before I begin, I was cut off. Video was lost on the prior meeting. I've had 3 or 4 people contact me on Facebook saying that I was cut off and they never saw me. So we have a problem with the video. Or is this just more bias and prejudice against me?
I don't know, sir. Were they on, there's 2 ways it's streamed.
I don't know which one they were
On
on.
the
They were
Facebook or
watching.
the website?
All I know is they were watching.
Okay, because I can share with you that my monitor here, I saw me close out the meeting. We haven't
I
started
hope
your
so.
time yet.
Oh, I know, and I appreciate that. I'm just trying to let you know if
Right,
there's a
thank you for the
malfunction.
feedback. Thank you.
That's all I'm trying to do.
Thank you, sir. Would you
I-
like to start?
Sure, William Zimmerman.
Thank you.
I too will talk about the same speed limit issue. So I filed a complaint against the city of Avon Lake for not obeying the Ohio Department of Transportation ruling from 1958. It states that the speed limit should be 35 miles an hour on both the state routes 83 and 6, and Avon Belden, the city, to continue to ignore this document for over 60 years. I believe this constitutes a gross dereliction of duty. There is no sound reason of such for years that this has gone on. I've made many references to this fact, and yet no solution has ever been offered. So, Mr. Koss believes that he can circumvent it. That's what he's trying to do. Nobody cares about ODOT. Mr. Phillips just gave you several examples how ODOT has rules, half a mile, both sides have to be at least 50. None of this complies. So from my standpoint, the city has changed the speed limit on 83, and no one can tell me when, why, how. Same scenario as Lake Road. There's no records. As Mr. Zilka said, that's not the way we did things. Then I get the problem of, I believe that this has been done illegally because you changed it from 35 to 25. Somewhere along those 60 years it got changed. Nobody had to give me anything. I go to John's department when Mr. Brubaker was still there. He said he did his due diligence, couldn't find anything for a work order to change it. More corruption, more collusion, more bullshit. Same thing. Guys, don't do your job. You violated your oath of office multiple times. He's violated his oath of office at least a dozen times to me in emails and on the phone. My problem is you guys shouldn't even be working anymore. Should be done. They should lock the doors and not allow you guys back in and have a new election to get everybody else into a position. Now, I know that won't occur, but I'm also not stupid enough to know that some of you gotta go. He should go, he should go, he should go, you should go. There shouldn't be any question about it. You're unfit for office. Don't even do what's required to pay attention. You're down reading and doing other stuff again. You don't care. You don't follow the rules. You think you're above the law. This is a horrible, horrible time in the city of Avon Lake.
Thank you for sharing, Mr. Zimmerman. Anybody else? Okay, then we're going to move on to our motions.
About the stream.
Yeah, yes, Mrs. Rossmarin has some information for all of us
There was
regarding.
this is in reference to the situation where you said it was cut off. There was a technical issue. It was cut off and restarted. It's been filmed, so it will be on the the website tomorrow, the entire,
When the entire presentation is presented.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just was trying to help you guys out and make you aware.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
there was
Thank
an
you, Mr.
issue,
Zimmerman.
but we're aware of it.
But
Thank you.
You took care of it. Thank you. Thank you. Next is motions. Do we have any additions or deletions to our motions? Seeing none, I'm going to take the first motion. I move to authorize the Public Works Director to advertise for bids for concrete, asphalt, and aggregate to be used by the Public Works Department during the 2025 construction season. In discussion, we've done this before, we've saved the city money, and I thank the Public Works Director for bringing this concept to Avon Lake. Mrs. Rossmarin, any other further discussion? Okay, Mrs. Rossmarin, please read the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it's passed. Next one, I move to authorize the city engineer to advertise for bids for the Miller Road Park sand dredging project. In discussion, this is something that we do yearly. It is also required of us, but it's also a safety issue so that people can use that area. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Next one, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I make a motion confirming the appointment of Scott Aurelia to the Planning Commission for a term commencing January 1st of 2025 and ending December 31st, 2029.
Discussion? Any more
He's
discussion?
served the Planning Commission well, I think, and actually, the last meeting made some very valid points, so
Yes.
I look forward to working with him.
I served with him, and he's an attorney. He also has experience in brokering developer concepts in different areas, and he brings his wealth of knowledge to the Planning Commission. Any further discussion? Mrs. Rossmarin, read the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move for the motion reappointing Carla Fitch and Sam Hamoud to the Community Relations Board for 2-year terms commencing January 1st of 2025 and ending December 31st, 2026.
Any further discussion from anyone? Mrs. Ross? Yes, Mr. Super.
Yeah, I can comment on this. I've worked with both of these people. Carla has done a lot of work with the committee. She's the newest member. She does a lot of work with disabilities, and Mr. Hamoud, unfortunately, his job is that takes him away, and he's missed some of the meetings, but he's always been very instrumental in coming up with different things for us to look at on the committee.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Kaz?
Thank you, Madam President. I move to appoint Diane Deasy to the Historical Preservation Commission for a 2-year term commencing January the 1st, 2025, and ending December 31st, 2026.
Any further discussion?
Yes, Madam President, I'm aware that you know Diane Deasy from the Avon Lake Garden Club. Would you mind talking a little bit about her?
Oh, I'd be real happy to. So Diane and her husband Tom are native Avon Lakers. They've lived here their whole life. They've been extremely involved in a number of fundraisers and community events, from St. Joe's to the Garden Club, true leaders. And she could bring a lot of history to the Historical Preservation Commission. They're both well-spoken and very strong researchers.
Thank
you. Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Kaz?
Thank you. I move to confirm the mayor's reappointment of Cheryl Lister to the Historical Preservation Commission for a 2-year term commencing January the 1st, 2025, and ending December 31st, 2026.
Any discussion?
Yes, I am very happy and grateful that the mayor is agreed to reappoint Cheryl Lister to the Historical Preservation Commission. Cheryl has been on board for a number of years now. She's lived in the community for over 20 years, and she has taught in Avon Lake City Schools. She's retired now, but she taught in the schools for 32 years. So she's got a real sense of history here in the city. She's held the positions of secretary and now holds the position of vice president with the commission. And if anybody knows Cheryl, she's also one not afraid to speak her mind. And we need someone like her with that tact on that group, because she gives her opinion, and more times than often, it is dead on 100%. So I'm glad that Cheryl is coming back. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Shamir?
I move to reappoint Mr. Dave Updegraff and Mr. Weldon Rice to Communication and Technology Commission for a 3-year term commencing January 1st, 2025, and ending December 31st, 2027.
In further discussion?
Well, I have spent the past year on the commission working with both gentlemen, and I can tell you that they are a wealth of knowledge and quite critical to the group.
Thank you. Further discussion, anyone? Okay, Mrs. Rossmarin?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Thank you. The next one is I confirm the mayor's reappointment of Amanda Oretz Burns and Katie Downey to the Tree Commission for 3-year terms commencing January 1st, 2025 and ending December 31st, 2027. In discussion, Amanda is the Director of Guidance at a school system in Parma, and she brings a wealth of knowledge in how to organize outreach programs, especially those that attract children and families. And Katie is a certified, degreed urban forester. Her specialty, instead of cities, is actually large land, and she works with the U.S. Forestry Department and the Ohio Forestry Department on large land areas, and she's been very instrumental in helping us with our standard review. Any further discussion? Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, the 2 has passed. I move to permit Mr. Arnold to be excused from voting on ordinance number 24-196 pursuant to codified ordinance 220.19B. Do you want to speak to this, Mr. Arnold?
I just have a conflict of interest.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. We have the roll call, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Ms. Gentry?
Yes, I move to confirm the city's participation in NOPEC's Sustainable Technical Assistance Resources, their STAR pilot program in partnership with World Connect Corporation.
In discussion?
Yes, so this program is one that we've discussed several times. It's NOPEC is we are one of 6 cities that are participating in this pilot program. No Avon Lake funds are a part of this. They are going to be assessing our buildings for energy savings, assessing our fleets as well, and also determining options for solar, potential options for solar.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Gentry? Seeing none, we have the roll, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move that the contract with Mr. Ed Whitman as interim finance director be concluded no later than January 15th, 2025.
In discussion?
We have a new finance director that's coming on, and Mr. Woodman has done a fine job with us. And my understanding is that he is going to be leaving our employ by that time. Thank you.
Right, there will be some handover. He'll be helping the new person in their transition. Mr. Mayor, do you have any further comments?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Ed for his time with us. He's done a great job. It's always fun working with Ed. We're going to miss him, but he has agreed to stick around for a little bit while we transfer to Beth. So I want to thank him for his time. He's working full-time currently in Huron, and yet finds time for us to do some of the work that we still need to have done. So I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Anyone else? Okay, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry,
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Zuber,
Yes.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Yes. I move to approve the 2025 City Council calendar. In discussion, as it was printed and produced, we've all discussed it. Everyone has agreed with the way that it's been printed, and we're going to ask if there's any further discussion. Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry.
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Zuber,
Yes.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh.
Yes, thank you. Now we move along to legislation. Are there any additions or deletions tonight from the legislation? Seeing none, we'll go on to the third readings first. Ordinance number 24-167. Mrs. Rossmarin, please read by title only.
An ordinance fixing the salary of the members of council in accordance with the provisions of the Avon Lake Charter and repealing ordinance number 53-2015.
Mr. Zuber,
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-167.
in discussion.
This increases the salary for city council as of 1/1/2026 from $12,000 to $14,000 per year. This is an increase of $2,000 as recommended by the Citizens Review Committee that took a look at this. And by looking at the ordinance that we are repealing, will take effect 10 years after the last increase was voted on by city council. So I think it's time for the increase.
And it will begin and start January 1st, 2026.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Koss?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. It's always uncomfortable to discuss your own salary and the need or the ability to change it or increase it. And I understand that. But as was stated by Mr. Zuber, this isn't something that City Council does often. This will be the first time in a decade that Council has looked at this. And just as we want to make sure that all the way down from our seasonal employees to our secretarial staff, to our department heads, all the way up and down the roster of employees are paid fairly, not at the top, not at the bottom, but in the middle, solid, fair compensation. People that want to serve on city council are people too. As Mr. Shondel said 10 years ago when we went over this. It's never comfortable, but I think that the city council did this the right way. I think that the Human Resource Committee, which was under Mr. Zuber at the time, asked for an ad hoc committee of citizen residents to take a look at this and do the study and make the recommendation. The forming of that ad hoc committee of residents passed by a 7-0 vote. And there were 3 members on there, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Krieg, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the third member's name, forgetting what her name was. What?
Pat?
Pat, okay. And I think she serves as the chair. But they did their due diligence, and they met, and they contacted members of city council to find out what we do and how many hours a day we do things. What is our schedule like? And then compared it to other communities. That's the due diligence that you need. We're not just arbitrarily picking a number out of the air and saying, let's increase it just because. They looked at what the surrounding communities had, and they came up with a fair recommendation for city council. And that is before us tonight. One of the things that I've learned from doing salary adjustments, especially when you're looking at a 10-year gap in between, it probably won't get touched again for another 10 years. But if it's delayed even 2 years or 3 years, now you're looking at a 13-year gap or 14 years, who knows when it'll be, until council takes a look at it again. And now the increase is going to have to be bigger to put you into that middle group. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about being placed in the middle group, not too high, not too low, but fair. So the longer you wait to do this, the larger that gap gets. So I am extremely comfortable in saying that I feel the same way with my colleagues, that you all work hard. We work hard. We put a lot of hours in. We sacrifice a lot of time, and we signed up for it. I get it. But that doesn't mean that compensation can at least keep track once every 10 years to compensate you fairly with your colleagues in other communities. So I would urge members of City Council to look at it as this is something that's going to be in place for the next 10 years. It won't affect all of us or many of us for the next few years. It doesn't go into place until January the 1st, 2026. So we're not voting on an increase for ourselves starting, 2 weeks from now. This is a year out. And we also have, council races that are going to be coming open next year. And we always say, well, nobody gets in it for the money. Agreed. Nobody does it for that. But with all of the other things that people have to commit to nowadays, especially younger families, with the cost of everything going up, with their time restraints that they have, and they still want to serve on a public body or an elected body, you have to at least make the position fair as compared to surrounding communities. We have a lot of younger people and people that are still working full-time that would love to participate, and it may seem like a small thing, a couple $1,000s, but it does play into the overall picture that you're being compensated fairly for your time. So I have no problem if a resident asks me, why did I vote for it? I have no problem describing it just as I did. This is once every 10 years. And this is not just for us, this is for who comes after us. And for some, that will be sooner or later. So I urge my colleagues to support this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak on this particular item? Ms. Gentry?
Mr. Zuber, would you mind explaining the background of the people that were on that committee? I think that's important.
The two people, Pat and Mr. Krieg, were both HR. Pat and Mr. Krieg were both HR professionals. And that was the whole reasoning on putting them on the committee. Because you got to remember, too, that this group also looked at the mayor's salary and to determine what they felt the mayor should be paid. And Mr. Brooks has been a long-time resident. He's the president of the Kiwanis. He was the chairman of the Charter Review Committee. He sat on another Charter Review Committee. So he's well-schooled in the city and how it operates. And I think that the three of them worked diligently to come up with some conclusions on what they think is a fair and equitable for council and the mayor to move forward. And I think that when I looked at this, it was $27 an hour if you work 10 hours a week. That's how much council would be paid. And everybody around here, I see Mr. Shamir sort of smiling there. We all know we work a lot more than 10 hours a week. And so I think that sitting here, we'll probably be here 3 or 4 hours at this meeting tonight. And that's just one night. And there's many other meetings that we attend and deal with the phone calls, and of course people have also spoken to me that we don't make enough money to do this job, and they would never do this job for the pay that we make. So
Thank you, sir.
You got a little bit more than what you asked for, Ms. Gentry, but
Anything else, Ms. Gentry? Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I've really struggled with this particular ordinance. I've heard my colleagues' discussions about it. My problem with it is the timing of it in terms of when it's to start. I think that it should start outside the term of anyone who's sitting here at the Diaz. So if it was to start in 2028, I would have no issue with it. But the way it sits right now, I don't think I can support it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Mr. Shamir?
I will have to second what Mr. Smith said. I wouldn't have an issue supporting it if it was outside of my term, but being within the term, I would have an issue supporting it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay.
Can we have the law director weigh in on whether or not council can pass an ordinance for a pay increase that is not during our existing term. So
You can pass it at any time, council.
I mean, if we were to pass it, so that, not pass it, but implement it in 2028 when none of us are on council.
You can still pass it. They can always change it. The ordinance can be changed by a new council, but
Okay, I was under the impression there may be an issue with that.
no. No. No, you're saying to have the effective date 28, 2028.
Right.
Yeah. No, you can do it now, but that council can change that, though. They can change it. Go ahead.
Anything else, Ms. Gentry? Mr. Cos?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I hear what my colleagues are saying, and I respect everybody's opinion on it. The one thing I will point out is that the recommendation is based off of the numbers that were put forth by the committee that was selected, the ad hoc committee that was selected by this group. Those numbers can change dramatically in 3 years. And now you're looking at 13 years in between an increase. And again, based off the numbers that were done in 2024, and you're looking at 2028, putting those numbers into effect. It doesn't all line up. You're throwing the balance off. And it's a difficult thing. But once a decade, a council has to make a call on this, and it's never easy. Just like it's not easy to talk about the mayor's salary as well, too. But once a decade, this tough vote comes up. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time for a vote. I don't think anybody else has another discussion. Okay, all right. Ms. Rossmarin, call the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
No.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. 4-3, this has passed. Very thoughtful discussion, colleagues. Thank you. Ordinance number 24-171. Ms. Rossmarin, please read by title only.
An ordinance to designate a portion of State Route 83 as a business district pursuant to codified ordinance section 402.07 and to modify the speed limit to be 25 miles per hour only within that portion of State Route 83 within the business district and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Cos?
Thank you. I move for passage of ordinance number 24-171.
In discussion.
Yeah, in discussion, this is something that's been talked about a long time. We took this through the safety committee and it passed with a 3-0 vote. We're going 3 full readings of city council. And this issue is really not a whole lot different than back in the spring when city council passed by a 7-0 vote, almost an identical piece of legislation dealing with Lake Road. I think that there's some need for some clarification on some of the definitions that are talked about in this declaring of a business district and thereby setting the speed at 25 miles per hour. So let's not forget that that's what the initial part of this is declaring a business district, and thereby it will trigger the ability for the city to establish the 25 miles per hour, which has been the posted speed there. Whether we like it or not, or however it happened years ago, that's what's been posted. And I think council has been very fair or very open that they don't see a desire to see that increase through that area. But I'm going to read a couple of definitions, and I'm going to put a little context to this as well, too. So, Section 402.07 of our code, which matches the state code, business district, and I apologize for reading the paragraph, but I think it's important. Business district means the territory fronting upon a street or highway, including the street or highway between successive intersections within the municipality, where 50% or more of the frontage between successive intersections is occupied by buildings in use for business, or within or outside the municipality, where 50% or more of the frontage for a distance of 300 feet or more is occupied by buildings in use for business. And the character of the territory is indicated by official traffic control devices. Now we're going to go again to the definition section of the state code. And a couple of these things are going to jump out, and that is definition of intersections, and definitions of traffic control device. So again, if you'll just bear with me for a second here. Okay. Intersection, according to the state revised code, I'm going to jump halfway down through it where it talks about it because we're going to go into the second part of this paragraph. And it states, intersection means the junction of an alley or driveway with a roadway or highway does not constitute an intersection unless the roadway or highway at the junction is controlled by a traffic control device. So when I first read that, I said, oh, traffic control device. That's a stoplight. That's a stop sign. Well, let's take a look at what the state says a traffic control device is. A traffic control device means a flagger, sign, signal, marking, or other device used to regulate, warn, or guide traffic placed on, over, or adjacent to the street, highway, private road, open to public travel, pedestrian facility, or shared use path by authority of a public agency or having official jurisdiction, or in the case of a private road, open to public travel by authority of the private owner or private official having its jurisdiction. So the main part about that is it's not just a traffic light or a stop sign. It can be any type of a marking on the road or any type of a sign that is used to guide traffic. So I asked our city engineer, and I also asked Chief Molnar and also our mayor, and I said, well, under that, and our law director, under that definition is a third turn lane. Is that a traffic control device? It's guiding traffic to a third. Yes, it is. Our signs on the side of the highway that don't necessarily, that show the roadway curving or such, is that a traffic control device? Yes, it is. So there's many different ways that you can have a traffic control device. And based on these definitions, I worked with the mayor, I worked with Chief Molnar, I worked with our city engineer and our law director, and the city engineer put together as a group effort, put together the map that became a part of this, which designates where this business district will begin and where the business district will end. It includes more than 50% on both sides of the road. It covers the 300 feet, which is the minimum that it could be for the business district to establish it, and that's per the state of Ohio. Now, the state of Ohio does not declare business districts. They give the criteria, and they allow municipalities to declare a business district based on the criteria set forth by the state, and we have done that based on the state. Under our home rule, we are able to do that. I also want to point out that we're not doing this without some sort of an indication from ODOT that we can do this. So I want to, the gentleman left, Mr. Perrins, he wrote a heck of an article back in May when we passed the Lake Road one. And the title of that article was, Avon Lake does not need approval to change Lake Road speed limits, ODOT says, dated 5/30/24 in the Chronicle. So in that article, this is interesting, Crystal Nealon, who is the Public Information Officer for ODOT District 3, which includes Lorain County, confirmed in an email that the city does not need to pursue further steps to designate the business district as long as the proposed speed limits do not conflict with the ORC according to the code. Speed limits for state routes or highways, like Lake Road, are outside of business districts that should be 35 miles per hour. The council's ordinance was in accordance with that code. I brought this one up before at the very beginning. The city of Columbus had a unique way of lowering their speeds on their downtown streets by basically declaring all of their downtown in a section to be one big business district, and they were able to move all of their streets from 35 to 25. Now, the interesting part of that is one of the streets named is Broad Street, which is State Route 40. And that's the part that pertains to us. So what they did was they, by a 7-0 vote, the Columbus City Council voted to lower the speed limits on all downtown streets to 25 miles per hour. Now, this was per the Ohio Department of Transportation spokesman. While the issue now heads to ODOT, ODOT spokesman Matt Bruning said Tuesday That review should be perfunctory under the approach the city is using, which is to designate all of downtown as a business district. ODOT had previously said it would have to approve a city traffic study before the speeds could be lowered, but that was before it understood the legal approach the city intended to employ, Bruning said. Therefore, the only state action still needed is to essentially make a record in a journal of the new speed limits, per the spokesman for ODOT. And I think it's also really important to note that the lawsuit that was filed against the city for the Lake Road Business District and therefore reducing the speed limit to 25, ODOT joined us in that lawsuit. Mr. Ebert, if I'm wrong, correct me, but they are also working against that.
That's correct.
Okay. So ODOT, I kind of think they're the authority. I don't know. Crazy, right? But I think that they're the authority on this, and I think under this tactic that we're able to do, we're able to keep the speed at where I believe the community wants. I think it's what the city wants. Nobody wants faster through that intersection. It's been that way. How it got that way predates me, predates all of us. But right now, I think we're taking the appropriate action to maintain the posted 25 miles per hour, and we're doing it in a way that is completely legal and one that we have every right to do. So I urge council to please support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any further discussion? That was very thorough. Thank you. Seeing none, Ms. Rossmarin. Oh, yes. We have further discussion? Did I miss somebody? Okay. Mrs. Rossmarin, call the roll, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Gentry, ordinance number 24175. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance approving the plan of operation and governance for the NOPEC opt-in gas aggregation program for the purpose of jointly establishing and implementing an opt-in gas aggregation program as a NOPEC member.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes, this is the NOPEC update to the plan of operation and governance, enabling NOPEC to start an opt-in gas program so that people who have left NOPEC do not have to wait if they choose to come back, wait until the next term. There are 2-year terms for their gas program. So this would enable someone who has left to opt back in prior to that next term.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. This is passed. Ordinance number 24-176. Mrs. Rossmarin, please read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to establish an opt-in natural gas program pursuant to Section 4929.27A1 Ohio Revised Code, jointly through NOPEC as a NOPEC member.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes, this ties into the previous ordinance and just enables NOPEC to create that opt-in program.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it too has passed. Ordinance number 24-177. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance amending codified ordinance section 208.01 entitled Fee Schedule.
Thank you. I move for passage of ordinance number 24-177. In discussion, this is where the ice and the worms will be taken out of this particular ordinance, and where pavilions and gazebos will be created at the new cost. And to remind everyone, especially those that are watching, the reason that we're doing this is that typically when people rent them, they rent them for the entire day. This would be for an entire day rental. In the past, we have divided it up into 3 different time periods, and they would need to purchase all 3 or 2 of the 3. And after each time period, the Public Works would have to come in and clean. This is going to be easier for those that rent. It's also going to be more efficient for our Public Works Department. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, this too is passed. Second readings, ordinance number 24-183. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance fixing a pay range for the position of Assistant Finance Director in the Finance Department and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith,
I move for the suspension of the rule requiring 3 readings.
thank you. Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Smith,
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-183.
in discussion.
Thank you. This sets the position of Assistant Finance Director with a pay range between $72,246.41 and $101,858.49.
Thank you. Further discussion by anyone? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. This too is passed. Ordinance number 24-184. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance awarding a contract for the 2025 Fourth of July fireworks and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Cos? Suspension.
I move for the suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Thank you. Mrs. Rossmarin,
Yes.
the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Cos?
Thank you. I move for passage of ordinance number 24-184.
In discussion.
Yes, this is another item that came out of the Public Safety and Health Committee meeting with a unanimous vote. This is selecting the company of American Fireworks Company of Hudson, Ohio, for an amount of $25,000 for the annual 4th of July fireworks display. This year's event will be on July the 3rd at Weiss Field. This company was researched and selected by Fire Chief Jeremy Betza and also Mayor Spetzel as well too. We understand that this company has a great reputation, and looking at the specifics of the show, it looks like we're getting, make a dumb pun, bang for your buck. It's going to get a lot of bang for your buck. So I don't know if the mayor has any other additional comments on this, because this is going to be the first time that we're utilizing them, but they saw something in this company that they brought forward. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we solicited 4 companies for quotes. Obviously, the dollar amount was the same, so we looked at the amount of fireworks we were going to be provided and also looked very carefully at their safety records. Excuse me, and we felt that American Fireworks stood out in that regard, which is why we're recommending them.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone? Mr. Smith?
Yes. What are the dates for the fireworks and the backup dates?
The show date is July 3rd, and the backup rain date is July 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. This too is passed. Ordinance number 24-185. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance awarding a contract for vehicle exhaust removal systems to Magna Grip and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Cos?
Thank you. I move to suspend the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Rossmarin?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Cos?
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-185.
Thank you. In discussion?
Yes, again, this is another item that came out of the Public Safety and Health Committee with a unanimous vote. If everyone recalls, the city applied for and was awarded a grant in the amount of $92,995.45 from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. That was on July the 8th, 2024. This project was bid out, and the selection of, what is their name again? They're Magnagrip, yes, they had another name as well too. Rossman, I'm losing it here. Rossman Enterprises as well too is actually the name of the main company, but yes, Magnagrip was the company that was selected for $99,748. And again, this is a result of a grant that we were awarded from FEMA. Thank you.
We always like to hear about a grant. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Moving along to resolution number 24-188. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
A resolution to adopt and declare a temporary budget for the year 2025 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zuber.
I move for the suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Zuber,
I move for passage of resolution number 24-188.
in discussion.
This establishes a temporary budget for the city for 2025 after the results of the last finance committee where we talked about the budget. It was agreed that we would do a temporary budget.
Thank you. Any further discussion by anyone? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll call.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it too is passed. Ordinance number 24-190. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the creation of the sewer collection fund number 722 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zuber.
I move for passage, or I move for the suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mrs. Rossmarin? I'm sorry, Mr. Zuber?
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-190.
In discussion.
This establishes a new fund, the sewer collection fund. This was described in detail by Mr. Monroe at last week's meeting.
Thank you. Any further discussion, anyone? Okay, seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll call.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. That has passed. Ordinance number 24-191. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the creation of the Water Distribution Fund number 723 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zuber.
I move for the suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Zuber.
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-191.
In discussion.
Again, this is a new water distribution fund, and Mr. Monroe explained it in detail last week at the collective committee meeting.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone? Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Thank you. Now we're down to first readings. Ordinance number 24-193. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance confirming the mayor's appointment of Beth Crossy to the position of finance director, establishing the rate of compensation for said position, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I move for the suspension of council rules requiring 3 readings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. As this is the mayor's appointment, I'll pass it over to him.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Beth comes up to us from Oberlin, where she has served for many years. We've had discussions about Beth's position earlier in committee sessions. She's going to be a great asset to the city. She comes with extensive experience, including a bachelor's degree, and she's a CPA. She also, I forgot to mention, is that she worked under Sal, who's a legend in the finance world, I understand, and we are looking forward to having her on board.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, she's going to be making $133,000, and she's signing with a 1-year, one-time, non-pensionable signing bonus of $1,500.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, anything else?
Nothing.
Okay, Mrs. Ross Marin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes,
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Ordinance number 24-194. Mrs. Ross Marin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a personal services agreement for environmental consultant services and declaring an emergency.
Yes, through the discussion that we had at the CCM, this is not going to be voted on this evening. This is going to be a first reading only. Whereas Section 59 of the Avon Lake City Charter, entitled Competitive Bidding, authorizes the expenditure of funds without public bidding for personal services as defined within the charter. The administration and council desired to retain the personal services of a professional environmental consulting firm to monitor the closed landfill at the Public Works Department. HCW Environmental Consultants LLC out of Mentor, Ohio, has provided a proposal not to exceed $68,200 for gas and groundwater monitoring. At the point in time, if this should pass, it would be declared an emergency major, meaning that the necessity of providing environmental consulting services for groundwater monitoring in accordance with the Ohio EPA requirements is thus for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Are there any further questions we have? Okay, moving right along. Ordinance number 24-195. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance awarding a contract for concrete work at Avon Lake Play Space, Alps, Phase 1 to RMH Concrete and Foundation and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Shamir.
I move for the suspension of the council rule for 3 readings of ordinance number 24-195, an ordinance awarding a contract for concrete work at Avon Lake Play Space, Alps, Phase 1 to RMH Concrete and Foundation,
Thank you.
and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
yes,
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Shamir,
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-195.
in discussion.
If I may turn that over to Mr. Liskovic.
Mr. Liskovic?
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah, so this is the award of contract, as mentioned, for the first phase of work for the Avon Lake Play Space. City went out to bid. We received 3 competitive bids on the project. Bids were reviewed and analyzed by Kimley Horn, and the recommendation was made to award to RMH Foundations and Concrete and Foundations.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone? Yes, Mr. Shamir.
Mr. Liskovic, question, when will the actual concrete work take place?
So that'll be determined once once approved and stuff like that. Obviously, there are preparations that can be done to manage during less than favorable temperatures, but we're looking to get going and take advantage of intermittent weather that we are fortunate sometimes to get in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
yes,
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, this too is passed. Ordinance number 24-196. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a personal services agreement with Bromhall Engineering and Surveying Company and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
thank you. I move for the council rules, I move for the suspension of the council rules requiring 3 readings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin. The roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
No.
Mr. Smith?
Yes,
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. This is the agreement with Bramhall Engineering, who does our engineering currently, to extend it into next year. Fully aware that we're going to try and find an engineer in the next few months. The fees are listed there in Exhibit A.
Thank you. Any further discussion from anyone? Yes, Mr. Shamir?
Is there a contract cap number that it will not exceed? Because I don't see anything on there. So this is effectively an open contract with no cap, and it could go into whatever number that it may be.
The only thing that I see is the 45 days to terminate it, and I'll pass it back to the mayor on that.
Yeah, there's no cap included. This is task-oriented, so as tasks are assigned, we go by the fee schedule.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes. Well, I would think that a contract like this with an open, effectively open check would require a tendering process. Thank you.
Anyone else on council? Seeing none. Mrs. Ross Marin, the roll call, please.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
No.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it has passed. Ordinance number 24-197. Mrs. Ross Marin, read by title only.
An ordinance to make appropriations for the current year and other expenditures of the City of Avon Lake for the fiscal year 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Zuber.
I move for the suspension of the council rule requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Ross Marin.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Zuber.
I move for passage of ordinance number 24-197.
In discussion.
This is making appropriations for the current fiscal year. This is the final appropriations. We have talked about this in the Finance Committee meeting to get things cleaned up for the end of the year.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I have some. If you look in the very second where it says whereas, oftentimes we call this the supplemental appropriation. And the language is right there in the sentence where it says whereas it is necessary to make supplemental appropriations for 2024. And for the public's information, this is done because we don't want any of the accounts to be left in the red. And so therefore, there's an appropriation so that there are funds that carry over and close out those accounts. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Ross Marin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it is passed.
Mrs.
Ordinance-
Council President, if I may, given this was the last financial-related ordinance, can we excuse Mr. Widman? He's got a full-time job tomorrow
Yes, sir.
morning. And I'd like to be able to get him out of here. It is a long drive ahead of him.
Okay. Safe travels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for bringing that up. Very good. Okay, we're going to move on to ordinance number 24-198. Mrs. Ross Marin, read by title only.
An ordinance ratifying the Avon Lake firefighters Local 1361 agreement and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I move for suspension of the council rules requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Ross Marin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. After negotiations between the city and Avon Lake firefighters Local 1361 for compensation and other employment, they have reached an agreement which the firefighters have ratified, and the city also needs to ratify it. The contract is kept on file with the city, and basically the highlights of it is that there's going to be 3% raises for the next 3 years.
Thank you. Any further discussion by anyone? Mrs. Ross Marin, the roll.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you, it has passed. Ordinance number 24-199. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the labor agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge Number 25, Avon Lake Division, for the police officers and detectives and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move to suspend the rules of council requiring 3 readings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. This, along with the next several items on the agenda, is extending the timeline in which to finalize negotiations with the 5 unions that are listed there. This one is with the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 25, Avon Lake Division for Police Officer and Detectives, for extending it, and all of them are extending it, the time to February 28th of 2025.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Yes.
Madam President.
Audra.
Yes, as Mr. Smith said, this is, not that we don't have agreements hopefully in the future. This was in order to extending negotiations to complete it. And with the holidays here, we're not going to be able to complete them in time, and we said February just to try to make sure, and all the unions have agreed to the extension, exactly as Mr. Smith indicated.
Very good. Any further discussion? Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, it is passed. Ordinance number 24-200. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the labor agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 25, Avon Lake Division, for the sergeants and lieutenants, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move for suspension of the rules requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Rossmarin?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, this is passed. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. Like the ordinance before it and the ones to follow, this one is until extension until the same date of February 28th, 2025. This is with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 25, Avon Lake Division for the sergeants and lieutenants.
Thank you. Any further discussion by anyone? Okay, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Smith, sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Zuber? Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you, this is passed. Okay, we're now down to ordinance number 24-201. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the labor agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 25, Avon Lake Division, for the police dispatchers, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
I move for the suspension of council rules requiring 3 readings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rossmarin.
Ms. Gentry?
Yep.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Move for passage.
Thank you. Any further discussion from
Yeah,
anyone?
like the others, this is until February, an extension until February 28th, 2025. And this is with the dispatchers, the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 25, Avon Lake Division for the police dispatchers.
Thank you. Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, this too is passed. Ordinance number 24-202. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the labor agreement with United Steel, Paper and Forestry, Rubber Manufacturing, Energy, Allied Industrial, and Service Workers International Union, AFL-CIO, CLC, Local 836, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move for suspension of the council rules requiring three readings.
Thank you. Mrs. Rossmarin?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, Mr. Smith?
Yes. Like the others, this, however, is for the, I'll move for passage. This, like the others, is for an extension to February 28th of 2025 for the labor agreements with United Steelworkers et al.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, this too is passed. And this is the last one for 2024. Are you ready? Ordinance number 24-203. Mrs. Rossmarin, read by title only.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the labor agreement with the United Steel, Paper and Forestry, Rubber, Manufacturing, Energy, Allied Industrial and Service Workers International Union, AFL-CIO, and CLC Local 836-1, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I move for the suspension of the council rules requiring 3 readings.
Mrs. Rossmarin?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Move for passage. The difference between this one and the other one is the 836 versus 831 of the labor units with United Steel and Paper, Forestry, et cetera. And again, is until extension until February 28th to 25.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion by anyone? Seeing none, Mrs. Rossmarin, the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes. Excuse me, this too is passed. So if you look at the number, we have passed 203, or not passed, but they have come before us, 203 different ordinances and resolutions in the year 2024. We're now at the time for public input, and this is on any topic having to do with the city of Avon Lake. Would anyone like to come forward? And you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Avon Lake residents and citizens, I'm Gerald W. Phillips. I reside at 461 Windward Way, practicing attorney for 47 years. ORC Section 731.07, title says, "Salary shall not be changed during term." Passed effective January 9th, 1981. Quote, "The salary of any officer of a city shall not be increased or diminished during the term for which he was elected or appointed." A few weeks ago, you passed ordinance 24-143, which is the interim development agreement, where the city entered into agreement with ALERG. In a previous meeting, I asked for a signed copy. I'm asking again for a signed copy. This agreement had provisions that the city was going to cooperate, assist ALERG to get a maximum TIF of 30 years, 100%, and a TIF approximately of $60 million minimum. Also, there were provisions that the city council would not unreasonably condition the zoning for this project. Throughout that discussion, there was clearly a number of points made about the $60 million TIF, about the $15 million that was going to be used to purchase the 23.71 parkland, $15 million for the improvements for the parkland. There was extensive discussion. Mr. Davis was up here. Many occasions, people asked for that appraisal. Ms. Gentry asked for it on the night that it was passed, asked if there was an appraisal. The answer she got was no. Okay, no appraisal. Well, unfortunately, that's incorrect. Okay, got an appraisal. It was done by Metro Parks, okay, the director, and your outside counsel reviewed it, had a copy of it, but didn't share it with anybody up here. October 25th, 2023, his billing record says, "Review Sowers Pierre appraisal for parkland on behalf of ALERG." So when you voted on that, you voted on the basis that that land, you got a letter of intent also says $15 million. So when you voted on that interim agreement, you went on the assumption that was $15 million that land was. But you know what? Mr. Smith knows that there's two types of fraud. Okay? Concealment of fraud, when you have a duty to disclose certain facts, or when you make a false statement that's incorrect. Both of those have occurred. That fact that this appraisal, you know what that appraisal for? $2.37 million. $2.37 million. That's 7 times that before you get to 15 million. So when you voted on that, you were defrauded. And who did it? Somebody up here who knew about it that didn't bring it up? Obviously, Ms. Gentry doesn't. Mr. Davis, I believe, had knowledge. He didn't disclose that there was this appraisal. He didn't disclose it was 2.37. Talk about corruption, talk about fraud. I think that's corruption and fraud. Let's talk about the infamous Brownfield Committee, okay? What's really disturbing is this letter, the Luca letter, where it says, are you aware the city has designated the CIC to lead the city efforts to redevelop the lakefront, including the former Avon Lake power plant? In this role, I am serving as a key liaison for communication between the city administration, city council, and CIC regarding the redevelopment issues involving the project. Signed, Steve Luca, chairman of the Brownfield Committee. We have Steve Luca, chairman of a Brownfield Committee, who has closed public meetings, doesn't have public meeting minutes, actually being the liaison. That sure smells. That sounds like corruption to me. But yet, you know, you blow off Mr. Zimmerman, okay, and say, oh, corruption. Give me an answer why Mr. Davis, who comes up here, who's your counsel, failed to disclose that to you. Huh? He didn't tell you that, did he? Councilwoman
No.
Gentry? Did you ask?
You have to.
Did you ask?
You have to speak to the chair.
Did you ask, Ms. Gentry?
Thank you.
Did you ask? No, nobody asked. Nobody asked. Well, you know, the parties to the Brownfield Committee is Steve Luca, who's chairman, Todd Davis, who's a member, and council Dan Bucci, Andrew Perry, Jeff Browse. Members of the CIC, the outside people are Janice Lapina, Steve Luca, Ross Vincent, and Ron Kovacs, and there's 3 city officials.
Thank you, sir, for sharing. Anybody else want to come forward? 5 minutes. Greetings.
Greetings, William Zimmerman. Mr. Phillips is quite educated about this matter. Appears to me that some of you may not be. But then again, there could be fraud and all the other things he claims. And you just don't want to tell. It's appalling that he sends me emails that says, we don't have an appraisal. I'm unaware of one. And as he just stated, Lorraine County Metro Parks had one done. It wasn't done by the city. Obviously, it wasn't ordered by Mr. Espel. But as he also stated, Todd Davis reviewed it on 10/25/23, over a year ago. So for over a year, there was knowledge that there was an appraisal. Not for 15 million, not for 9 million like Mr. Zuber wanted to say. As I've stated up here, the assessor says 1.5. This appraisal says 2.3. It's nowhere near the amount that you guys have been saying. Pushing. Trying to tell the citizens that we're going to cut a TIF deal and make you money to pay for your schools. But that's not the deal. That's not even close. The real deal is the corruption that goes on behind the scenes with the Brownfield Committee. If we didn't spend our days going and researching paper that we finally get. It took me months to get the CIC minutes. We had holes in them. We had to find out what we were missing. We had to double check. And for all of the filibustering Mr. Cost does, we finally found the answers. We know now what's been going on. I was in a meeting with Mr. Ebert earlier this week, or last week. He asked me, what's this all about? What are you trying to do? I told him we're trying to get to the truth. Because that's the only thing we care about. And the fact is that all the corruption and everything else that's been going on, we're finding out now the truth. Citizens of Avon Lake, you'll see in the near future that the truth is there. We found reasons to believe and then filed suit in the Ohio Supreme Court. Case number 2024-1711. Go to your computers, look it up, read it. And you'll see the collusion and the corruption that's going on. There's more to come. As I told Mr. Ebert, we're going to sue the shit out of you. And so we're going to continue to do that. This holiday season, we'll be working to make sure that there are more suits. It's what has to be done to clean this dirty house. Now, after all of that, I can't believe we're paying somebody $133,000 to be our finance director. She makes more than the mayor, and the mayor's overpaid as it is. In closing, before we go away for the rest of the year, I want to thank a colleague of mine who I couldn't have done any of this without your recommendation to hire Mr. Phillips. Mr. Jeff Broush, I want to thank you for recommending Mr. Phillips. Ironically, you're on the Brownfield Committee, and you're going down with the rest of them. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else would like to speak? Okay. Any miscellaneous business or announcements by anyone? Mr. Shamir?
Yes, I just wanted to repeat that there will not be a Ward 1 meeting in December, and the next one will be the last Tuesday of January in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cos?
Yeah, just want to say it's been a trying year, new people coming on board. Jeff recently on board as well, too. We've had some really good discussions on a lot of things. New council president, lost Marty as council president, a lot of experience. But even though we don't always agree on everything 7-0 all the time, we do have good, healthy debates, and I just want to let you all know that I really do respect where you guys come from on these issues. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, see you next year.
Thank you. Anybody else to my right? Anybody else to my left?
Move to adjourn.
I have something I'd like to say, sir, if I could. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone for the dedication, the time that you bring forth here, and for the residents that do come. We have discussions, sometimes they're difficult ones, but they're discussions that is part of the American way, you know. Our republic sometimes is a messy one, but it is one that we all believe in. And I want to look forward to the opportunities in 2025 and wish you all happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. Thank you. Move to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. May I have the roll?
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes, thank you. We are adjourned. It is